Sorry that that was so quiet, but I'm glad that they put every word up on the screen. So I hope that you caught a little bit of it. Um, I thought I had it. I thought I had it right when I came in this morning, and I mean it was close. It played. That's good. Um, I found that yesterday while I was finishing up this PowerPoint, and I was just looking at different um, videos about what's the meaning of Christmas. What is the one thing that you would say sums up the meaning of Christmas? And I thought this was adorable. Now, some people would disagree with me, but I love to hear children read things because they mispronounce words and they say things that, you know, yeah, I mean, he does a better, or she does a better job reading that than I would. I'd have to take a couple takes, but it was so cute. And I'm sorry for those who maybe don't like hearing children read or sing things just because they're, unpolished, but I think it's very heartwarming to hear a small child understanding the meaning of Christmas, where so many today, adults, full grown, don't. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the Merry Christless that we say to one another before we recognize the true meaning of Christmas. And so, if I asked you, what's the meaning of Christmas? You all probably have an answer. Most of you would probably answer the same thing. You would say, Jesus Christ, God sent his son, he came to be born. And some of you might also say, and we visit relatives, and we decorate a tree, and we give gifts, and we eat a lot of food, and we have a lot of fun. But I'm not talking about the commercialized Christmas season. Not the stores and the gifts, not the trees, not the treats, but the real reason for the season. Because many people would tell you that it's a time to give gifts, that it's a time to get gifts. Many people would say that the reason is so that you have an excuse to visit your family, so that later on in the year you say, I got mine done. We visited you in December. We're gonna take our vacation to Florida and not to Canada or to New York where it's a little bit colder. But the real reason is actually Jesus. The real reason is that God sent his son so that we would not have to worry about what it would be like without Christmas. So I ask you, while we speak today, to think about what is the real reason that you celebrate Christmas? And how do you celebrate that reason? Because it's easy to see our heart by the way that we celebrate. Now, personally, this is probably not going to shock anybody, I have 3 nativity scenes set up in my house. 2 of them are very small. They're just little ceramic stands that you put up, and it has Joseph on next to Mary on a donkey holding a little baby, very, very cute. But I also have this very elegant one that a friend gave to me of glass figurines set up on a bookshelf in our front window. And I often sit in the chair by that window, and I look at it, and I think, how lucky am I that I could sit next to the scene that saved my life? And for many of you, that's probably the same case. You see that every morning or every night or every day that you're home, you see this nativity scene and you think, how lucky am I? And yet there are people in the world who don't. Merry Christless. Christmas is becoming more and more Christless because we are losing the focus of what it really means to be focused on God. We are losing what it means to have this holiday in the first place. Santa becomes a substitute for Christ. A jolly old man in a nice red sleigh who brings good little boys and girls presents. And, well, bad ones. Don't really talk about that. And yet, as parents, we tell them it's okay. Whether If you're bad, you're going to get coal, but if they're still bad, you know that there's still going to be presents underneath that tree because Santa doesn't care. Santa doesn't care whether you're good or bad because he wants you to have joy. He wants to bring you gifts. And yet, we don't really talk about the real gift, the real thing that we've been given. The focus on peace and giving gifts allows for the priority of worshiping Jesus to shift towards those temporary, monetary, physical things that we can hold and get bored of and throw away. The priority of the Christmas message is that God sent his son Jesus to this earth on Christmas Day to give his life for the sins of the world. Period. I could stop there. I could really be done. If that's all you got out of today, that's all you needed to get. Because ultimately, no matter what else I say, is just going to back up that point. God sent his son on Christmas Day so that he could give his life for our sins. That's it. But last week we saw an excerpt from a very famous, very well-known, probably very loved Christmas story, The Grinch, and how the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes and he really learned the meaning of Christmas and how it's not just the stuff, but it's the people, it's the love that is shared, it's the joy that's spread out amongst the people when they're together, when they know the real reason. Well, this week I want to talk to you about another famous Christmas story that came to my mind. And if you laughed at that, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. A Christmas Carol. Now, if you've never seen A Christmas Carol, or you haven't watched it yet this Christmas season, which if you haven't, what are you doing? But if you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it recently, it is a story about this old man named Ebenezer Scrooge. I know, what a name. So, Ebenezer Scrooge sounds exactly as pleasant as his name suggests. He's cranky, he is materialistic, he's selfish, and he doesn't care whether the Christmas season comes or goes, because to him, it's pointless. It's a holiday that people take off, and he's losing money, and how dare they? He only cares about one thing, making more money. If you even whispered under your breath Merry Christmas around him, you would promptly be greeted with bah humbug. Basically saying, shoo off, we don't need that, I'm busy, I care about what I care about, and you can keep your Christmas to yourself. The universal sign for who cares. Bah humbug. His workers barely got Christmas off because if he gave them the whole day off, he would be losing money. So they'd probably have to work the first 4 hours of the day or the last, depending on which one they wanted to take off, because he was such a kind boss and gave them the choice. But they still had to work because it didn't matter. It didn't matter to him whether or not they were there and they were unhappy, because he was making money, so he was happy. And he did not ever invest in their personal lives. Not once did he say, what are you doing for Christmas? Or how does your family celebrate Christmas? Or what is Christmas about to you? Because to him it didn't matter. Nothing and no one could change Scrooge's opinion of a lousy, good-for-nothing holiday. And this is probably an unfair depiction, but the innkeeper's apathy in the Christmas story kind of mirrors many of us today who have that same opinion. It also mirrors the opinion that Scrooge had. Now, I don't know the innkeeper. I wasn't there, and if I was, then I wouldn't be here. And I promise this guy, I don't know. I don't want to judge this innkeeper, but he was probably a really good person. And that's nice, but he didn't recognize that the baby that was about to be born was someone that needed to be treated with importance. He's one of many. We definitely don't know enough about the guy who told the family of Jesus to sleep out in the barn. And we hope that that was the best he could do. That was a consolation for not being able to put them in a room. And and we look at that and we think, yeah, that's a pretty lousy situation. That really stinks. That innkeeper was so rude and mean, but it wasn't that he was spiteful. It was that he just couldn't be bothered. He was so overrun and so overworked and so overburdened that when this young couple comes to him and needs a room and she's, 9 months pregnant, about to give birth, he had no sympathy. He had no empathy. Not to say he was hateful, but it really didn't matter one way or another who was coming to that door next, because they weren't getting a room either. Regardless, we must keep Jesus as a top priority in our life. We see that and we should learn from what he did. Yes, sometimes we get overburdened. Yes, sometimes we have busy weeks. Yes, sometimes we have a lot to do and a lot on our plate and a lot on our mind. But if we shrug Jesus off to the side because I'll get around to it, we fall into the same pitfalls of the innkeeper. In the first service, we were in Luke 2. We read the passage from 8 to 20. Well, for this service, I'd like to give you the beginning of that. And if you have your Bibles, you can read along with me. Luke 2, 1 through 8. If not, it's on the screen. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius, the governor of Syria. I just read the sentence wrong. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. Now, we see from the first service, and if we keep reading, that Jesus was born. He was wrapped in swaddling cloths. He was placed in a manger. The 3 wise men came. The shepherds came. There was a star, an angel. We know this story. But the interesting part about this was that Jesus was exactly born at the right place and the right time. And while the innkeeper was busy, had no time or no care to give a second glance at this young couple, he was exactly where he needed to be. And that's how it often happens. Jesus is going to be where Jesus needs to be, and if we're not there, we miss it. And so making Jesus a priority in today's world is almost unheard of, but when it is, when he is, oh boy, do we see a miracle. Because if we shrug Jesus off as just someone who existed, or if we take the idea that he was just a great prophet and nothing more, well, we don't really get anything out of it. We don't have any hope, and we definitely don't have any peace. Caesar, the guy who issued the decree for the census, he had selfish intentions when he issued that decree. Self gets in the way of a lot of things. When we place ourselves above others, we're not only breaking the laws of Scripture, the greatest commandment, to love God and to love others, but we are making many pay a price for our own selfishness. It's easy to sit back and say, well, this only affects my life, or this decision only affects me. I couldn't possibly be hurting anybody else. But that's not true. Caesar's census and taxation practices were not necessary at the time. There was literally no reason. But they happened. And they inconvenienced every single person under Roman rule, except Caesar, because it benefited him. The inn was far too full for Jesus and his earthly parents because the census of the crowd in Bethlehem. The only reason they couldn't get a room is because they were told to go there in the first place when everybody else was told to go back to where they came from. Is our life too full for Jesus? Is our selfishness putting people in rooms they don't belong? The Romans ruled the civilized world at the time of Jesus' birth. And by contrast, Joseph controlled very little. Against his desires and political convictions, he complied with the Roman order and traveled with Mary to Bethlehem, because what could he do? What choice did he have? He was told to go or else, and he did. Sometimes we often feel like Joseph, caught by forces or people or circumstances that are much larger than we are. The Romans were in control as far as human authority could be, and sometimes it gets in the way of us being able to be and do what we need, where we need to be and what we need to do. But the Romans didn't recognize that they also had limitations. I don't know if any of you are history buffs, but the Roman Empire pretty much fell apart. And that kind of fell apart when they decided that the Roman rule was going to last forever. They created this decree that the Roman emperor would never fall, and then it did. And so, for them, they were God. They didn't need God because they were their own God. But in reality, God controls all of the world. Even the Romans, even our government today, all of the world. In all times and all places, he works his will. God did not write Roman law, but he definitely judged it. He did not soften Joseph's bumpy road. The donkey ride from where they were to where they were going was not easy, nor was it smooth. But it did strengthen them. God is in charge of our lives as well. He guides us even when we're going through bumpy roads. And he provides even when we have nothing in our hands. Like Joseph, we live each day by faith. We have to trust that God is going to do what God is going to do, and taking our selfishness and doing it ourselves will ultimately fail. We have to trust that God is in charge. We do not recognize God and act like God or look like God. We are not God. Because if we are, then our lives are definitely too full for God. If we are our God, then we don't have room for the one true God. My second point is that a lot of us, most of us before we were before we were Christians didn't care about Christ. He didn't matter. Either we didn't know about him because no one told us, or we kind of heard about it, but that happened so long ago, how does that affect me? Or some of us were wholly opposed to Christ before we became Christians. But regardless of how you felt before you're a Christian, you're careless about anything that Christ did or does until someone puts the opportunity in front of you to see what the truth is. Perhaps the innkeeper was only interested in his own personal agenda. I mean, think about it. Picture yourself as the innkeeper. It's late. You're running up and down hallways. You're checking on guests. You're fetching towels and water and camel food and donkey food. and pillows and blankets and electric blankets because everyone's cold, and now your inn is full. You have complainers left and right, and you have people with needs left and right, and there are probably other babies in that inn. So you hear babies crying and donkeys making the noise that the donkeys made, and you have people talking in your ear, I need this, I need this, I want this, I need this. And you're tired. You throw up the sign, no vacancy, no one else can come in here, we're done, I don't want to deal with another person as long as I live. And you're tired. How often do we get to the end of the day and we sit down and we think, I never want to do a day like this ever again? That's probably how the innkeeper felt. And usually at the end of that day, you're not really sympathetic to anything else that anyone might be going through, or, any work stories that sit down with you at the dinner table, or anything that's happened to anyone else that day. Doesn't matter. My day was terrible. Don't tell me about your terrible day. Don't tell me about your good day. That's it. You're done, right? Careless. But perhaps, maybe there's a little bit more to that. And regardless of the innkeeper's attitude, he could have slammed the door in Mary and Joseph's face and said, get out of here, bah humbug, I don't want to deal with this. But he did take a second and say, well, I don't have anything, not really, but we have a barn if you want to be there. It's a roof, it's not very warm, and it's not very comfortable. And so they took it. What else did they have? And yet the innkeeper had no idea what he was doing when he sent them to the barn. Maybe we get careless because we sit in our own personal comfort zone. The innkeeper was probably way outside his comfort zone. He probably was like, I was not prepared for this. I would have built a bigger inn. Someone should have told me. I don't know what's going on. But for us, we get careless when we're in our nice, warm bubble, and we're beautiful, special snowflakes, and we don't want anyone else to come pop our bubble. We don't want to do anything outside of our comfort zone because why would I do that? That's scary. And so we sit in our bubble and we do what we do, and we don't let anyone push us or test us or pull us in a different direction. We get careless. And the same thing happened when the government forced Joseph to make a long trip and to just pay your taxes, go here, do this, do that. He had to take his fiancée, which we've already seen. They've had a little bit of a struggle because, she's pregnant. It's not his. We're going to get through it. And now they're like, okay, one thing after another. I got to go from here to here. What? Should we really be getting married? Is this really something we should be doing? Because everything's just saying no right now. And yet, they were very faithful to do exactly what God had told them was going to happen. They were faithful to move and pick up and just roll with the punches. But when they arrived in Bethlehem, they couldn't find nothing. A whole city. There wasn't even one person who's like, yeah, I got a spare room in the back. It's got a window unit, but, it's a place. Nope. One barn. That's all they found. Whole city. All they found. And for them, that was way outside their comfort zone. And so Jesus' life began in poverty. It literally began from nothing. And later, Jesus would point out to his disciples the fact that there might be a time when you don't have a place to lay your head. It's going to happen. That's just how it works. Because when you're stepping outside of your comfort zone and when you're putting God first, God makes you uncomfortable. If you're comfortable, are you really doing what you should be doing? Now, I'm not saying there aren't times when you can be comfortable, when God puts you in the perfect situation and you're really excited about it. There will be issues, but you're like, yes, this is where I need to be. Sometimes you're feeling that hope that says, you need to go over there. You don't want to go over there. And for me, that happened these last 2 weeks when I was leading the hymns for the traditional service. Now, that's probably the first time a lot or any of you have ever seen me leading hymns in the first service. It's because it's uncomfortable for me. Not because I don't like hymns, not because I don't like the first service. It's because I don't feel good enough to lead hymns. Like, the notes are all over the place, and they've got a lot of runs, and like, there's so many verses. I'm like, I'm going to get out of breath. I'm going to mess up. This is going to be terrible. Why would you do this to me, God? Why couldn't you let Sandy get married on like a Wednesday and he could be back for Sunday? And he puts you in places where you're so uncomfortable. And yet, out of that discomfort, uncomfort's not a word. Out of that discomfort, you grow. You really see what's happening to put you in that uncomfortable position. Because for me, I would have never felt capable of doing that if I hadn't been forced to. I would have never felt like I could do more to worship God if I hadn't been put in that situation. And yes, I will not say it was easy. Yes, it was extremely hard and scary, and everything that could have gone wrong probably did, and yet it still turned out good in my opinion. And I was blessed by it, and I know that there are some people who are blessed by it, and that's God's plan, not mine. And I'm thankful for that. Finally, I want to remind you not to let your living get careless. If you're not stepping out of your comfort zone, if you're not doing what you need to do, if you're sitting back and relaxing because God's got it under control and I don't have to do anything, which I've said those words before, in times where I know I should be doing something and I'm not, be careful. Because it's easy to get careless when you think, oh, God's almighty and he doesn't need help from me, and he's definitely not calling me to do that, and he's definitely not telling me to go there, and he's definitely not telling me to say that. But maybe he is. It can be easy to brush aside what Jesus has done as something of the past, completed. But the work is not finished. At least not in us. The work to change, the work to grow, the work to get better, that's still going, and we still need to actually take those steps to complete it. If we knew Jesus was coming, would we make room for him? Are we only kind and caring to people that we know? To our friends? To our neighbors? What about the homeless and the hungry and the thirsty? Does Jesus get the master suite of your life or the shed out back? And if he was standing here today, what would you tell him? No vacancy? Now, Scrooge started pretty bad. I have to admit, I watched that movie for the first time, and I thought, man, this guy, he is something else, and he is a bad dude. But it got better, I promise. He was visited by 3 spirits, ghosts, whatever you'd like to call it, Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future. Now, this is in no means a Christian movie. It's not like rated R. You've all seen it. It's a little kid story, but it's not overly Christian. But if you watch it enough, you can kind of see how looking back on who you were, seeing where you are, and looking forward to where you're going is exactly what Christ calls us to do. This is where you were, and you're not there. This is where you are. What are you going to do now? And that's where you're going. What direction do you want to take? Luckily, Scrooge realizes this. He realizes that Christmas isn't about money or presents or having his shop open or ignoring all the people around him, but it's about hope. It's about faith. It's about trusting the people who are in your life and allowing them to show you the true meaning of a holiday that before didn't have any. The real reason for the season. In simple, direct language, Luke presented the Christmas story. No trees, no fancy lights. All we get to see is one lowly manger, a bunch of animals, and an overcrowded inn. It isn't surprising that there was no room for them in the inn, considering the number of travelers flocking to various cities during that time. What do you expect? But what is the most surprising is that there was so little care for the Son of God. What is surprising is that this anticipated child who was born unto us was not even given a second thought. Don't find yourself in that place. Don't find yourself in a place where you're not giving two thoughts about Christ and the reason for the season. It's very cliche, and I know I've used it a lot, but it's true. Don't find yourself seeking the wrong reasons, because you won't get anything out of this season. Pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for this time. We ask that as we reflect on your gift, on who you are and how you've loved us so powerfully, we ask that you would give us the peace to be uncomfortable. Give us faith to do as you're calling us to do, even when we feel like we can't. Give us the real reason for the season. Allow us to open our eyes. Allow us to see you and who you truly are and how you would want us to live. And that we would take the spirit of Christmas and we would carry it with us every single day of the year. Because while Christ came on one day, he lived for many, and he died so that we could have many, so that we would not be condemned to a life without you. So we ask that you would remind us, that you would give us the peace and the hope that we can go forward, and that we can be joyful for this season. We thank you, and we love you. It's in your name we pray.